I am excited. I am nervous. This might end up being a really long discussion. I have spent the last 3, maybe 4 weeks binge watching the last 5 seasons of The Office. I am a new Office fan. This was my first time watching it. I reviewed every episode individually up until about season 4, and then I realised it was taking far too long to watch it, so I just binge watched the last 5 seasons, cried my way through the last 3 seasons, and I finished it 3 days ago. And today I renewed my Now TV subscription just to watch the paper. So I really needed this to be good. And obviously, the fact that I've just finished watching The Office means that I'm very much in an Office headspace. It's a very emotional time for me. I'm still there. I haven't really left it. I spend a lot of time watching interviews with the cast and behind the scenes things. So I'm still very much in an Office headspace. But at the same time, I am a new Office fan. So I don't have years and years and years of emotional history with the show. So I feel like it's an interesting perspective because I really need the paper to be good. But also, if it's not good, it's not potentially ruining years and years of love and passion. So I think that was important to establish that that's where my opinion is coming from. And today I'm talking about the first episode, season 1, episode 1, which is titled Pilot. And this one is directed by Gregg Daniels. It's written by Gregg Daniels and Michael Coleman, and I'll go through the cast as I go through the episode. There will be spoilers from now as I go through pretty much everything that happens. If I continue reviewing it, I won't dissect it as much, but I have a lot of thoughts, and I feel like this could go either way. This is only the first episode. I haven't watched beyond this. It's very early days, but I feel like they have a really difficult task. Because the paper has to establish itself as a show in its own right, while also telling the viewer that if they like The Office, this is a show they're going to watch. So it has to be similar but different, and I think that that's definitely a challenge. And based on this first episode, I feel like they've struck a pretty decent balance. So I'll now go through things chronologically, and I'll share some thoughts along the way. There will be comparisons to The Office. That's why I kind of wanted to review this first episode. I'm probably going to binge watch the rest of the series. I think the first season is 10 episodes in total, so it's not huge. And I might go back and review the episodes afterwards. But for now, this is the first time I've seen it. I've just finished watching it. This is my fresh perspective. And it starts off with the opening slide, really, really emotional, telling us that back in 2005, the crew started filming in Scranton for the documentary. And now they're filming here, and I'll say where here is in a moment. And then we have Bob Vance giving us an update, and I didn't know that was going to happen. I should say, I knew nothing about this. Absolutely nothing, apart from Oscar. And I also have to say, I do feel like Oscar is the main reason why I decided to watch this, or I guess why I decided to reactivate my Now TV subscription to watch this, because I wanted Oscar. I needed more Oscar. So I'm not saying that the show is relying on Oscar to pull in numbers at the beginning, but certainly for me, that's what happened there. And as I said, we have Bob Vance, and he's giving us an update, and we find out that Dunder Mifflin Scranton branch is no more. And as I said, I'm a new Office fan, but I fell very hard around season 3 or 4, so it's very emotional for me, especially right now, having just finished the show. But if you've watched the show for many, many years, maybe since the beginning, and you've watched it many times, and then you're going to find out, hang on, it's gone. Scranton branch is gone. That's a really devastating way to start off this program. And we find out that actually in the Office space is now a company called One and Done Laser. And we see it. We see this new company, this One and Done Laser, in the Scranton branch office space. And I love and hate it. I love it because it was fascinating. I hate it because it made it seem too real. So it was very, very emotional. And we find out that Dunder Mifflin was actually bought by a company called Enervate, based in Toledo, Ohio. They purchased it in 2019, and Enervate sells products made out of paper, so the purchase does make sense, such as office paper, and they manufacture the Softies toilet paper, and they also own the Toledo Truth Teller, which is the newspaper and the subject of the paper of the documentary. And I think that was a really good decision to have this company, paper-based company, buy out Dunder Mifflin. But the company's based in Ohio. So it's connected to Dunder Mifflin, but it's in a different state. So there's a genuine reason for why we're not going to bump into any of the Scranton-based cast or characters. But maybe there's room for cameos. Now, there could be a cameo in this first season. I've got no idea. I haven't looked ahead, but I would highly doubt it. But there's no reason why some of the characters from Scranton couldn't at some point come and visit Oscar. They have a reason to go there. By putting Oscar in this show, it's giving us that direct connection with Scranton. So maybe that could happen. It worked with Frasier and Cheers. They moved Frasier to a different state. We had occasional cameos. I'd love for the same thing to happen here. I don't know if that's their plan, but that would be brilliant. We then learn about the Toledo Truth Teller. We hear from a character called Ken, played by Tim Key, and I was getting kind of mild Michael Scott vibes. I don't think he's a copy of Michael Scott, but there was an element of it there. And I will be honest, from the very beginning, I was kind of comparing all of the characters to characters in The Office. Not necessarily intentionally, but my mind was just drawing parallels immediately, as I said. I kind of saw a bit of Michael Scott in the character of Ken, and we then immediately, and I maybe part of me thought that wasn't fair. I shouldn't be trying to draw parallels between the characters. But I feel like they're also trying to do this, and I'll come back to that in a second. We then meet a character called Mare, played by Chelsea Frei, and then soon after that, we get the intro. And initially, the music didn't really appeal to me. I didn't think the intro was that great. I think the intro should have focused a bit more on the characters. I did like the paper logo. I thought that was kind of cool. And I did actually listen to the song, to the intro, a few times on its own after watching this, and I actually started to like it. So I think over time, I will enjoy that a lot more. It's written by Nick Thorburn and Patrick Ford. And then we meet reporter Barry, played by Dwayne Shepherd Sr. And as soon as the camera turns to him, I just thought, that's Stanley. That is 100% Stanley. He was asleep in his chair. There was just so much about this character immediately that I thought, you cannot tell me they weren't going for Stanley vibes with this character. And that's why I think it's okay if I'm drawing parallels between characters in The Office and the paper. Because I think they did it intentionally with Barry. And if I ever accidentally call him Stanley, I do apologise. And then we meet Esmeralda. She's played by Sabrina Impacciatore, and I don't love her. I don't hate her. It's very early days. It's worth mentioning that I hated Michael Scott in season 1, to the point, in The Office of course, to the point where I wasn't going to continue with the show. And then I grew to love him, and I absolutely love the character. So even if I don't like a character in episode 1 of the paper, I don't think it means very much at this stage. But the point there is that I didn't love her. I did love that she kept calling the paper the TTT. I found that to be quite fun. And then the camera pans to a burning building outside. And that's what I would consider to be the first real joke, or the first, I guess, funny moment in the show. And I also feel like doing the camera work there, panning it, it kind of felt like The Office up until that point. Not so much, but it started to feel a little bit like The Office. But I will say, while I'm talking about this, in this first episode, again, very, very early days, there were times when I forgot I was watching a mockumentary. And I feel like in this first episode, they maybe needed to make a little bit more of an effort to make it very clear that it is the mockumentary. Whereas there are plenty of times when it felt like it was just being filmed as a normal sitcom. So I hope that they make more of an effort with that as time goes on. Certainly they might. So I'm keen to see what happens there. We then meet Ramona Young as Nicole. I quite like her. Don't really have any strong thoughts yet, but I thought she was okay. And then we meet Detrick, played by Melvin Gregg. Again, no immediate response to the character, but I certainly don't like the character. And then 9 minutes and 11 seconds into it, we meet Oscar. And he doesn't want this. He will not give them permission to use his voice or his likeness. And then they did something that I don't think was a good idea. After Oscar says that, we have a card on the screen that basically says, yes, we can. And it explains that the contract Oscar signed in 2005 didn't have an end date, so yes, they can. But that doesn't work because this is supposed to be them filming footage for a documentary that is yet to be released. But by editing that title card, that's something that we would see in the finished documentary. This is supposed to be the raw footage that they will then obviously edit into the documentary. So it kind of broke the illusion a little bit. Yes, it was funny. I enjoyed it. But then I guess I overthought it. And it doesn't make a lot of sense because we are not necessarily meant to have access to this raw footage. We're only supposed to see it once they package it for the documentary. So I liked it, but it wasn't the best idea. We then get a brief mention of AI. On the one hand, it's a good idea that they're going to maybe address topics that definitely weren't addressed in the office. If they're going to do something 20 years later, they need to address topics that wouldn't have been possible back in the day. But I hope they don't lean too much into it, because like many people, I watch sitcoms to escape reality, and like many people, I do fear that AI will one day replace me in pretty much everything that I do. So I don't want to be reminded of that when I'm trying to escape reality. So it's a good idea to address more contemporary topics, but the less AI focus, the better. But I don't fault them for doing that at all. And then we meet Domhnall Gleeson as Ned Sampson, and this is his first day at the Truth Teller. And initially, when I saw him, and I'd love to know if anybody else thought this, I am overthinking things, but my initial thought was, is he going to be the Dwight-esque character? And the only reason I thought that is because he was wearing mustard and brown colours, very Dwight colours. And then I thought, okay, actually he behaves a little bit like Toby. He has quite a Toby-like passion for what he's talking about. But maybe he's a bit too enthusiastic, or maybe a bit too happy, almost, to be a Toby character. So at the moment, I don't have a direct comparison for him, but also I will come back to that in a moment. They then lock Ned out because there was a previous security breach, and I feel like this is the point when we step away from introducing the characters and start to introduce actually the narrative and the plot that might drive the next few episodes forward. And Ned obviously gets into the building, and we find out that he'd knocked over Mare's salad when he bumped into her earlier on, and he offers to take her to lunch. After all, he owes her a salad. And I kind of thought, are you meant to be Pam and Jim? And it does feel like that's what they're going for. The salad incident was their meet cute, and it definitely feels like they're trying to give us Pam and Jim vibes, but they're not as awkward. And I say that with love. I love Pam and Jim, but because they knew they were attracted to each other, they didn't know that the other person was attracted to them. Because they knew they had feelings for each other, they kind of were a little bit awkward around each other. Whereas Ned and Mare have just met, so that's not the case here. So it's never going to be exactly the same, but I do think maybe, and I could be wrong, but I think they are maybe trying to replicate that a little bit. Maybe they're trying to get us as the viewer to fall in love with the concept of Ned and Mare, and we'll see what happens there. And then we cut to Oscar, and it's so bizarre, because even though I know he's in the show, he's the head accountant, he has a reason for being there, it still just instantly makes me think of The Office, which is inevitable, of course. I love it, but it's strange. And then we're at the cafe with Ned and Mare, and I will say I feel like it was a little too early to take us away from the main office. I very nearly said the Scranton branch there. To take us away from the main office and go to the cafe, I think it's a little too early for that, but I don't really have any major issue with it. And then Ned explains his plans to Ken and Esmeralda, and then we find out Esmeralda sent an email to everybody about Ned. It was really awkward, and then Ned introduces himself to the room as the new editor-in-chief, and he doesn't seem annoying. He seems determined, passionate. I can't see any problems with this character, which is not a complaint, but I was concerned that there would be too much of a Michael Scott vibe here. Not necessarily concerned, but I worried that if they were going to replicate that kind of management character, it would feel too much like they were trying to recreate the success of The Office, which, let's be honest, that's clearly what they're trying to do anyway. But if they're going to try and do that, don't make it too obvious. And so far, as I said, I think they've struck a pretty nice balance there. And I also realised at this point that they're doing the individual interviews in what I initially thought was a closet, but now I'm thinking it's a corridor, a narrow corridor with shelves. I'm not entirely sure what that space is. I don't like it. I really don't like it. It's enclosed, it's uninviting, it's not as bright, and we can't see the office in the background, and I don't like it. Again, they were probably going for something that was a little bit different rather than just using the conference room, so I think they probably made a conscious decision to make it different, but I don't like it. And it's not just that I don't like it because it's different, I don't like the enclosed space. I don't like that the office isn't in the background. I don't think it works very well. I can't imagine it being a big issue, but I'm not happy with that decision. And then Ned is watching a documentary from the 70s about the paper company, which is quite nice. We see this footage a little bit, and it's quite nice to see. And then Mare takes him down to see something cool. And we get a couple of seconds of suspense as we're going down the stairs to see what this is. And I was thinking, it feels like we're going down to the warehouse. And I wonder if this is going to be part of the set that we see quite frequently, or if this is going to be only an occasional thing. And we find out that it's a Goss Community Press, and it's absolutely gorgeous. It is so stunning. And then Mare briefly looks at the camera, and I had honestly forgotten, as I mentioned before, that I forgot that I was watching a mockumentary format. I don't think they made enough of an effort to make it feel like a mockumentary. Yes, we're only one episode in, it's too early to judge on that front, but certainly I expected a bit more of that. Maybe even being a little bit over the top with that, especially if you're brand new, if you've never seen The Office. Honestly, at this stage, I don't know if I would recommend the paper. I feel like at least with episode 1, it is very much feeding fans of The Office, which I don't have a complaint about. I don't think that's a bad thing necessarily. But if you weren't aware that it was going to be a mockumentary, it's kind of easy to forget. And maybe that's a good thing if you're not really a fan of mockumentaries. I'm actually not. But it worked so well in The Office. I was looking forward to them replicating that. And I don't think they did a great job of that in this first episode. Yes, they put the card on screen, for example, with saying that Oscar, the contract he signed has no end date. It was funny, but again, it doesn't make a lot of sense because this is meant to be the raw footage, not the finished documentary. So I think in some ways they tried too hard and missed the mark. And in some ways, I don't think it was as strong as it could have been. But again, it's early days. It could certainly improve from there. And then we get the closing shot of the building. It seems less isolated than Scranton. There's a lot more around about. And it's not that we didn't have anywhere to go in Scranton, but whenever they went outside, whenever they went down to the car park, it didn't feel like there was much life immediately outside the branch. Whereas I feel like the whole world is there right here, and that could lead us to some interesting situations. So I'm keen to see what the rest of this season is like. I have committed myself to watching it, partly because I did pay to reinstate my Now TV subscription to watch this, so I'm going to watch the whole thing. But I'm looking forward to it. It's far too early for me to say, yes, this is a good show, or no, I don't think it's going to work. If I were to give my early predictions, I would say that the ratings for season 2 probably won't be as high. I think it's going to be one of those cases where people tune into the first season as fans of The Office to see what it's like. Some people will drop off. I don't think it will pick up many fans that are not already fans of The Office. But at the same time, I'd say it will have at least a couple of seasons. I'd like to see it go a couple of seasons. As I said, I hated the first season of The Office. because I detested Michael Scott, and now he's one of my favourite characters ever. So even if this first season was terrible, which based on this first episode I don't think will be the case, it would still need a couple more seasons to really find its feet. One could argue it had 9 seasons to find its feet, to find a format that worked, to find a style of comedy that worked. Obviously, those basic elements are what they're trying to recreate with the paper. So maybe one could argue they've already had 9 seasons to perfect the format, but I'd say it needs a couple of seasons to really give it a proper chance, and I would be happy at this stage to stick around for a few seasons. Even if season 1 ends up being not very good, I would still give a second one a go, because if I hadn't done that with The Office, if I had made the decision to stop after season 1, I would be missing out on so many emotions right now. So I'm glad I made that decision. The pilot is interesting. It was an emotional experience. I do think, and this is not a criticism, I do think it was created for fans of The Office. Whereas, to compare it with Frasier and Cheers, I feel like Frasier could have a completely new audience because they feel so different. They weren't really trying to create the same atmosphere with Cheers and Frasier, whereas this one very much feels like they are trying to recreate the success of The Office, which is not a complaint. I don't blame them. I don't think they've managed to do it with this first episode, but I think that would be an unfair expectation anyway. And for the most part, apart from Barry, who is just instantly my current favourite character, apart from Barry, there are not really many direct replicas. I'm seeing bits of characters in other characters. I am seeing a kind of Jim and Pam situation with Ned and Mare, but because the characters have just met, it's not exactly the same. So, keen to see what happens. I did enjoy this. Looking forward to watching the rest of the season, and if you've been considering watching the paper, if you're a fan of The Office, absolutely at least watch the first episode. I'd love to know what you think of it. Looking forward to seeing what they do with Oscar as well. We have the opportunity now to get to know Oscar in a different setting. Yes, he's basically doing a similar job, and he's still working with paper, but it's a different role, and I feel like I'm keen to see what they do with the character and where they take the character and his story. And I feel like, and this is just a prediction, I feel like they won't focus completely on Oscar, because they're going to try and say, well, we're not just The Office 2.0, we are a different show. Yes, we have Oscar, which I think was to bring in the numbers, which I don't blame them for. But I don't think they're going to focus too much on Oscar, because it would basically be like saying it's The Office 2.0. So I think they could go in a lot of different directions, but so far I think they have a fantastic balance. The mockumentary aspect needs to be a little bit better, but they're not too far away from The Office quality there. The comedy isn't really there, but again, season 1 of The Office, it didn't work for me. I didn't really like it at all. Seasons 2 to 9, certainly seasons 4 to 9, just absolute perfection, absolutely gorgeous. At this early stage, I'm not feeling any connection with any of the characters. I love Barry, but I don't feel a connection with the character yet, but it's possible. There is definitely a lot of opportunity here. I hope the show does very well. I hope it does extremely well. Looking forward to seeing what else it has in store. Really enjoyed the pilot. It was an exceptionally emotional experience. And if you watch it, I would love to know what you think of it.